I used to think the worst thing that could happen in a lecture hall was a professor who loved the sound of their own voice. Then I got assigned to Class Sector 9, Row C, Seat 14, as the official Academy witness for interspecies integration outcomes. That is a polite job title for sit there, don't blink, and write down the moment someone embarrasses their entire species. The Academy called it the Varan Military Institute. Everyone just called it Varan. Varan was where the galaxy sent its future heroes, its future tyrants, and its future officials who would later pretend they were always against tyranny. And humans were the newest flavor of controversy. Not because they were tall, not because they were strong, not because they had fangs or claws or venom sacs. No, because humans looked normal. That sounds ridiculous, I know. But when your campus is filled with 7-foot tusked bracken, slick-skinned Nemi who can smell fear like soup, and feathered Irixi who argue by screaming at different pitches until someone quits, normal becomes suspicious. Normal is a disguise. Normal is a trap. So when the Academy announced they were accepting a human exchange student, everyone reacted like someone had quietly placed a live grenade under the snack table. I reacted too, but in my case it was professional curiosity. My name is Rel. I'm a Davari. We're not scary, we're not flashy, and we definitely do not win wars by intimidation. We win wars by writing rules.
Yes, I know.
Try not to laugh. We've heard all the jokes. Anyway, my job was to watch the human record behavior and report whether integration was stable. The administration loved that word, stable, as if species were furniture. The human's name was Tessa Hale. Easy name. 2 syllables, 1 sharp edge. Like a compact blade you keep forgetting is in your pocket until it cuts you. I saw her for the first time on day 1 walking into lecture hall Kappa with a small bag on her shoulder and a face that said politely, "I am here, please don't make this weird." The galaxy immediately made it weird. The whispering started the moment she stepped in. Human, soft, small, no armor, no crest, no rank, no fangs. A Brackham cadet in the back leaned toward his friend and muttered, "I could fold her in half." His friend snorted. "If she doesn't snap first." I wrote that down. Not because it was insightful, but because it was going to age terribly and I wanted it on record. Tessa didn't sit in the front like someone trying to impress. She didn't sit in the back like someone hiding. She chose the middle. That's what made it worse. Middle seats are for people who believe they belong. Professor Halveck began the lecture droning about combat doctrine and interstellar engagement protocols. Halveck loved doctrine. Halveck loved protocols. Halveck loved the smell of his own authority. Tessa opened her notebook, and she studied. Not pretend to study while listening to gossip. Studied. Real studied. Her pen moved at a steady pace. Neat lines, no hesitation. She didn't glance around for approval. She didn't flinch when someone behind her hissed, "Deathwelder," like it was an insult and not a warning label. I watched her for 2 weeks. She arrived early. She left quietly. She scored high on tactical exams. She asked exactly 1 question per lecture, always precise, always sharp, and she smiled sometimes. Not a big smile. A small one like she'd heard a joke no one else understood. It made the other cadets uneasy, because smiles are supposed to mean safety. But hers felt like patience. Then the day came. The day the Academy stopped pretending this was about education. It was the 3rd lecture block. The room was crowded, warm with breath and ego. Professor Halveck was explaining the honor ladder, which is what Varan called the formal ranking system for combat skill. He was on slide 17. He would die on slide 17 if he could. Tessa was writing. I was recording, and the doors slammed open. Not opened, not pushed, slammed. A shockwave of noise rolled through the hall. Conversations died mid-syllable. Even Halveck's voice snapped off like a severed cable. In stepped General Vargo Klein. Klein, just the sound of that name made spines straighten. Klein was not a professor. Klein was not a guest. Klein was the kind of person whose footsteps made other people reconsider their life plan. He wore a combat coat with burn marks that weren't decorative. His face had scars that looked earned, not arranged. His eyes were the color of cold metal, and behind him 2 security officers carried a sealed case. Yes, a case, because apparently today's lesson required props. Klein didn't greet the room. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He scanned the cadets the way a predator scans a herd, not deciding who to fight, but deciding who isn't worth the effort. Then his gaze stopped, right on Tessa. She didn't look up. That is not bravery. That is not ignorance. That is control. Klein spoke. His voice was low, not loud, but it still filled the room. Human. The word hit like a thrown weight. Tessa kept writing. Klein took 2 steps forward. Human girl. Still nothing. The whole hall held its breath. I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling vents. I could hear my own stylus tapping once. Accidentally, because my hand had decided to betray me. Klein stopped at her desk. He stared at the top of her notebook. Then he said, very calmly, "Step forward. Combat trial. Now." A ripple went through the cadets. Some leaned forward hungry. Some leaned back, relieved it wasn't them. Professor Halvek found his voice again. "General Klein, with respect, this is a lecture block. Procedure requires scheduling, a notice period, medical oversight." Klein didn't even turn his head. "Sit down, Halvek." Professor Halvek sat down. I did not know a body could move that fast while still pretending it was choosing to. Tessa finally lifted her eyes. Slowly, she looked at Klein like he was a mildly inconvenient weather pattern. Then she closed her notebook. The sound of it was small, but in that room it landed like a decision. She stood up. She wasn't tall, she wasn't armored. She was wearing the standard academy uniform, slightly oversized at the shoulders because Varan uniforms were designed for species with broader frames. Her hair was tied back. Her face was calm. Her eyes were not empty, focused. Klein leaned in slightly as if trying to smell weakness. "Do you understand," he said, "what a combat trial is?" Tessa tilted her head. "Yes, sir." Her voice was steady, not loud, not pleading, not defensive. Klein's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but it didn't become one. "Then step into the ring." The ring was a polite term for the reinforced training platform behind the lecture hall. Varan liked to pretend it was civilized. The platform was a square of alloy plates with impact sensors. It was used to settle disputes, test rankings, and publicly humiliate anyone who looked too confident. The cadets began shifting, clearing the central aisle with sudden eagerness. Even the ones pretending to be above it were watching. Tessa walked forward, not rushed, not slow, just certain. I followed behind because that was my job, and because if I didn't record this, the Academy would summarize it later. And Academy summaries are always missing the part where they were wrong. Klein walked onto the platform and faced her. He lifted his chin. "Trial is simple. You face an Academy champion. If you lose, you return to theory track. If you win, you enter combat track. If you refuse, you're removed from the program." A Bracken cadet near the front whispered, "She's finished." Another muttered, "I give her 10 seconds. I wrote those down too." Tessa looked around the ring. Then she asked, "Who's the champion?" Klein pointed without looking as if it didn't matter which one. "Brax." Brax stepped forward. Brax was Bracken. Massive. Thick muscle-plated skin. Tusks that curved upward like trophies. He wore light sparring armor, because Varan believed in fairness, which usually meant giving the smaller opponent fewer chances to survive. Brax rolled his shoulders and grinned. "You're the human," he rumbled. Tessa nodded. Brax laughed. "They told me humans were stubborn. I thought you'd be bigger." Tessa's eyes flicked to his tusks, then back to his face. She said, "Are you always this talkative, or is today special?" Laughter burst from the cadets. Not friendly laughter, predator laughter. Brax's grin widened, then tightened at the edges. Klein raised a hand. "Rules. No lethal strikes, no weapons." Tessa glanced at Klein. "No weapons. Understood." Then she looked at Brax again, and she said, "Send anyone." The hall went quiet. That sentence didn't sound like arrogance. It sounded like she'd made peace with the outcome. Brax snorted. "After I break you, you can send whoever you want." Klein dropped his hand. "Begin." Brax moved first. Of course he did. His kind always moved first. They loved the spectacle of their own momentum. He charged with a stomp that shook the platform. He swung a wide arm, aiming to catch her at the shoulder and slam her down. Tessa didn't back up. She stepped in. That was the first mistake Brax made. He assumed she would retreat. Humans, it turned out, did not always retreat. She slipped under his swing close enough that I saw the fabric of her uniform ripple from the wind of his arm. Then she struck. Not a punch, not a dramatic leap. A short, precise blow to the inside of his knee. Brax's leg buckled. His charge collapsed into a stumble. His eyes widened. He tried to regain balance. Tessa took a second step and drove her elbow into the side of his neck. Not hard enough to kill, hard enough to turn his brain off for half a second. Brax dropped to one knee. The hall made a sound. A collective inhale like the room itself had been slapped. Brax roared and swung again, angry now, less controlled. He reached for her, trying to grab her torso. Tessa pivoted. She caught his wrist, twisted. Just slightly. Brax's massive arm turned against him. His shoulder rotated. His own weight pulled him forward. Then Tessa kicked right into his chest. Brax flew backward. Yes. Flew. A 7-foot armored bracken lifted off the platform and hit the alloy plates with a crash that made the impact sensors flash. He lay there stunned, blinking like someone waking from an unpleasant nap. Silence. Pure, stunned silence. Then the platform's sensor chimed. Match. Concluded. Brax attempted to sit up and failed. A medic stepped toward him hesitant, as if Brax might bite. Klein's eyes narrowed. He stared at Tessa like he'd just seen a neat trick performed with a weapon he didn't know existed. The cadets began whispering again, but the tone was different. Not mocking, not amused, confused, nervous. A Nemi cadet near the edge whispered. That was efficient. Another whispered back. That was illegal. It wasn't illegal. It was just unfamiliar. Klein spoke. One match proves nothing. Tessa exhaled. Slow. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She looked mildly annoyed, like she'd been interrupted during a good page. Klein pointed toward the cadets. Next. Combat track contender. Step forward. A tall Erixi stepped in. Feathers flaring. Name. Juno. Juno bowed theatrically, the way some species did when they wanted to pretend they were civilized while preparing to tear you apart. I prefer Grace, Juno said, voice like a sharp flute. Try to keep up, human. Tessa nodded once. Begin, Klein said again. Juno moved like a whip. Fast, spinning, talons flashing in controlled arcs. It was beautiful, in a way that made you forget it was designed to injure. Tessa watched. She did not chase. She waited. Juno tried to bait her, darting in, slicing at air close enough to make the audience flinch. Tessa's eyes tracked every movement. Then Juno lunged. Tessa stepped sideways, caught Juno's forearm and pulled. Juno's momentum betrayed them. Their feet left the ground for a heartbeat. Tessa's shoulders slammed into Juno's midsection. Juno hit the platform hard. Breath knocked out. Before Juno could recover, Tessa pinned their wrist and pressed just enough pressure that the joint threatened to lock. Juno froze. Not because they were weak, because they could do the math. Klein's voice cut in. Yield. Juno swallowed. Feathers trembled. Yield. The hall erupted. Not cheers, not celebration, a frantic, unsettled noise. Like a crowd realizing the cage door might not be closed. Klein didn't look away from Tessa. His jaw tightened. He motioned again. Next. A third cadet stepped forward, then a fourth. Tessa put them down with the same calm precision. Not flashy, not brutal, just finished. It wasn't a performance. It was a function. I started to feel sick, not from fear of violence. I'd seen plenty of that. From the realization that I had misread her completely. We had all misread her. We thought she was here to prove humans belonged. No, she was here because humans already belonged. And Varen hadn't caught up yet. Klein finally lifted a hand and halted the line of challengers. The platform was scuffed. The air smelled like sweat and shock. Tessa stood in the center, breathing evenly. Hair loosened slightly from the movement. Her sleeves were still neat. Her expression was still controlled. Klein spoke, and now his voice held something new. Interest. Where did you learn to fight like that? Tessa blinked. Then she said, on a small planet where things fall harder. A few cadets laughed, uncertain. Klein didn't. He stepped closer. You didn't use strength. Tessa's gaze didn't waver. I didn't need to. Klein's eyes narrowed further. You didn't use anger. Tessa's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. Anger wastes time. That sentence crawled up my spine like cold, because it meant she wasn't even heated. This was her calm. Klein turned and nodded to the security officers. They opened the sealed case. Inside was a practice harness. A head and shoulder rig fitted with sensor nodes, the kind used for neural response trials, the kind used when the Academy wanted to see what you were made of, under pressure, under pain, under fear, the kind used when the Academy wanted to break you politely. Murmurs rose. I heard someone whisper, "That's not standard." Another answered, "Nothing about this is standard." Klein lifted the harness with both hands. He held it out toward Tessa. "This is the real trial," he said. "Not these cadets. They were warm-up." Tessa looked at the harness, then at Klein, then, very softly she said, "So that's what this is." Klein's mouth pulled tight. "Yes." Tessa nodded once as if confirming something she already suspected. She reached out and took the harness. Her fingers were steady. Klein watched her closely. "You still want to say it?" he asked. "That line. The one you said." Tessa lifted the harness slightly, weighing it. Then she glanced toward the cadets, who were suddenly very quiet, very small in their seats despite their size. She looked back at Klein, and her voice cut clean through the hall. Send anyone. I wrote it down. Of course I wrote it down. Because I could feel it. That moment. That shift. The Academy had wanted to test a human. Instead, we were about to test ourselves. Klein stepped aside and gestured to the center of the platform. Put it on, he ordered. Tessa raised the harness, and for the first time since I'd met her, something flickered across her face. Not fear. Not hesitation. Recognition. Like she was meeting an old enemy. She fitted the harness over her head. The sensors clicked into place. The platform lights dimmed slightly as the system activated. A low hum filled the air. Klein looked out over the hall. Record this, he said, voice cold. Every second, my stylus hovered. My hands were damp. My heart was going too fast for a species that prided itself on calm. Tessa stood still. The harness nodes began to glow faintly. Her breathing slowed. Klein leaned forward. Just a fraction. Human, he said. Show us what you are. Tessa's eyes lifted, and she spoke quietly, like she was talking to herself. Okay. The harness emitted a sharp tone. The first pulse hit. Tessa's body stiffened for half a breath. Her jaw clenched, then her shoulders relaxed again, as if she'd decided the pain was not worth acknowledging. The hall watched. No one laughed now, because whatever we were about to see, it wasn't going to be a classroom story anymore. It was going to be an Academy legend, and I had the uneasy feeling that Part 2 would end with the galaxy changing its policies. Not because humans demanded it, because humans made refusal feel unsafe. The second pulse hit harder. I know that because the training harness has 3 standard modes, and the tone it made was not the tone for educational discomfort. It was the tone for, we are about to find out what you do when your body begs you to stop. Tessa Hale didn't stop. Her fingers tightened once on the harness straps. Not enough to tear them, just enough to confirm she was still in charge of her own muscles. Her shoulders rose a fraction, then dropped. Her breath stayed even. General Vargo Klein watched her with the calm attention of someone studying a weapon they might have to use, or survive. The lecture hall was so quiet I could hear the sensor fans spinning inside the platform floor. I could hear the Bracken cadet Brax wheezing as medics checked his ribs. I could also hear something else. The tiny, humiliating sound of several cadets swallowing. Klein's voice cut through it. Level 2, he said. Professor Halvac made a small noise. Not a protest. More like a prayer. Klein ignored him. The harness chimed again. A third pulse slammed into Tessa's nervous system. Her head tilted a millimeter. That was it. No scream. No stagger. No collapse. Just a tiny adjustment like she'd shifted her weight against wind. Somewhere behind me an Erixi cadet whispered. That should drop her. I didn't answer, because my mouth was dry. And because the terrifying part was this. I believe the Erixi was right. A standard body should have dropped. But this human was operating on a different set of rules. Or maybe she was operating without rules at all. Klein stepped closer, boots hitting the alloy with slow, deliberate taps. Your heart rate is rising, he said. Tessa's eyes stayed forward. Yes, she replied. That's the part where most candidates panic. She exhaled. I noticed. A few cadets laughed and the laughter died instantly when they realized no one else was joining them. Klein's mouth twitched again. That almost smile trying to become real. Do you think you're funny, he asked. Tessa's voice was calm. No, sir. I think this is. There it was. Sarcasm. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a human casually insulting a general in front of an entire academy without raising her voice. Klein studied her. Why aren't you afraid? Tessa blinked. Slow. Because fear doesn't help. Klein narrowed his eyes. That's not an answer. Tessa's gaze finally shifted toward him, and for a second I felt like I was staring at a door that had been closed my whole life, and someone had just turned the handle. She said, It is. You just don't like it. Oh no. That was when I realized something important. This was not a student being tested. This was a predator being inconvenienced. Klein stepped back and motioned to the security officers. One officer, a thick-necked Karin with a shaved head and a face like a broken wall, lifted a control pad. Level 3, Klein ordered. Professor Halvac stood halfway up from his chair. General, Level 3 isn't authorized during lecture. Klein turned his head just enough to glance at him. Halvac sat down again. The control pad beeped. The harness emitted a longer tone. Deeper, harsher, and the next pulse hit Tessa like a hammer. This time she did move, not back, not down, forward. One step, her knee bent slightly, like her leg had briefly forgotten it belonged to her. But she didn't fall. Her lips parted and she released a short breath that sounded like a laugh, trying to decide whether it was appropriate. Then she said quietly, "Wow." The hall shivered with unease. Because wow was not the word you say when you're losing. It's the word you say when you're measuring something. Klein's gaze sharpened. "Explain," he demanded. Tessa swallowed once. That one was meant to break focus. Klein's jaw tightened. And Tessa's eyes flicked back to him. And it didn't. A Bracon cadet blurted. "How?" Klein snapped his head toward the voice. The bracken visibly shrank, which was impressive, because he was huge. Tessa answered anyway, without looking at the bracken. "Because I've had worse days than this." That sentence did something to the room.